Okay, so we are recording, and it's our February FAC meeting, February 2021. I guess we should call the meeting to order. Welcome to our guests. Let's begin with approval of the agenda or adoption of the agenda.
I so move.
Okay. Do we need a second for that?
I don't think so.
Okay, all in favor? You can just do a voice aye.
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 Okay, any opposed? Any changes? Any opposed? All right. Moving on to approval of the minutes, and they were attached to the agenda in the form of a link, right? Motion to adopt the agenda. To approve the minutes. I just lost my screen for a second. Okay.
I'll move to adopt the minutes.
All in favor?
There's one thing. It says next meeting, March the 12th. I think it should have said February the 12th.
That's right.
Just a small.
Oh, yes, sorry, I'll change it.
I've caught Lois in an error.
Yes, you did, thank you.
It's one of my minor achievements.
All
Very much.
right. Yeah, so it should have said February the 12th. All right.
My mind was away from snow.
With
So
that,
with that
perhaps
correction.
in Cancun.
So adoption of the minutes with that correction. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Minutes approved. Okay, so on to item 1. If I can find it. Sorry, I'm juggling. Just give me 1 second, please. I'm looking for. Oh, never mind, I lost it. So we have Dr. Gates with us today for a conversation. Last time we met. Thank you for being with us. We thought that we had a really great conversation about ACME, and that this just seemed like a really nice forum to have more in-depth conversations about, issues within the system. So she's agreed to come and have a conversation with us, a fairly sort of more open discussion. So I don't know if you want to say anything, just to say hello, Dr. Gates, and then we can.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Sisinker. I am pleased to be here. I'm not unfamiliar with the FAC. Since my entry at the system level, I've met frequently with the Faculty Advisory Committee. So I'm very happy to be here. And primarily, as I shared with Kalina and David earlier, I wanted to focus initially on ACME because it is in a draft form, it is evolving, and to share with you what my and our response, because specifically this is occurring more on the community college side, not under the writing of the system office. So if I could just have a few minutes here to share with you my response to the meeting with CSET that occurred earlier, and the resultant impact of that meeting, and then open that up to you for any questions. And with the remaining time, but I have to tell you this, guys, I do have a hard stop at definitely 2, because I'm also 30 minutes behind. I'm gonna hop on another meeting that I should have met with at 1:30, but I said no. I've already asked the FAC to make a change for me. So today is Friday, but it's one of those days. So if I could please just share with you guys what I initially talked to the CSET group about, and then tell you what has resulted from that. which, by the way, I shared at the outset of the meeting that there were some misconceptions about the ACME policy, and that those were in part, I wanted to be quite transparent, a result of unclarity on our part when the policy was written and disseminated. And so later that was identified and corrected. But some of the misconceptions generally, and I'm not going to spend as much time as I did with CSET here because we have a limited amount of time, was that the GPA would be used as a sole placement measure. Well, that was inaccurate. In fact, it's GPA and multiple measures would still be used to place students. So that was one misconception. Another misconception from having read the policy initially when it was released was that default placement would be without course support. And that too was inaccurate. Any default placement is the maximum level of embedded support. And embedded support, for all of us who are familiar with this, supplemental student support shows that there will be something in addition to what the student would be introduced to in any given course, where there was evidence that the student was somewhat deficient in the learning outcomes that we expected students to attain after completing the course. Another misconception was that the draft, and this was a big one, the draft policy was dictating curriculum. Guys, I'm out of academia. I've come up through the ranks. I know faculty control curriculum. But so let's just get that straight now. That clearly was not at all what the policy does. It sets parameters and conditions for operationalization, but the faculty determine the curriculum. The faculty determine the curriculum there in the ACME policy. And then I only have two more here. Another was a misconception that it would remove algebra from math pathways. And that wasn't true. It was the creation of math pathways, and faculty would choose the contextualized algebra needed for those pathways. And I remember Rob, who was out of, I think he was out of Three Rivers, who held a terminal degree in mathematics, who was one of the ones who helped craft and design this language. So it's not as if we don't have disciplinary experts from faculty who assisted in drafting the ACME policy. And the final misconception here was that the draft policy dictates CSU placement process. And it doesn't even speak to CSU placement processes for the community college, and transfer students was another one, because one of my colleagues out of, I think it was Southern, a very nice gentleman who asked if in fact the student were, the ACME policy were adopted, would the CSUs be forced to accept that course? And the answer was absolutely not. It's like all courses, transferability. When courses are transferred, there are either MOAs, articulation agreements, but it's like any other transferability of a course. The course will be accepted and transferred based on the outcomes of the course and not any type of not the prerequisite for any course, but the outcomes of the course. And there are several, particularly the universities, who have models that look at outcomes, course outcomes, as opposed to prerequisites. So those were some of the common trends. I will tell you this, I had a wonderful and productive conversation with CSET. It was very insightful. I was able to understand why some of the comments were written. And there were, I think, between over 80 or 90 pages that were read and submitted from the campuses about this policy. But as a result of that, and I'm trying to find the document here, I have so much stuff, papers I'm shifting here, there have been changes as a result of the conversation with CSET. in that policy, recognizing that clearly one size doesn't fit all. And even though we refer to a deficit type model that we're trying not to just adhere to and move forward, we recognize that there were certain groups of students, particularly the ESL folk, English second language, others who may be placed in a co-requisite course that would not be as productive and beneficial to the students. So I do know that I have notes somewhere on that, but I'm not, as you ask questions here, I will speak to that. The other, I thought, very beneficial experience I had was during the CSET meeting, one of the council members said, you know, I wish you could see my course or attend my course, to which I responded, I will. Let me know when you're going to offer that course, and I will attend it remotely. And I did, after that meeting, set up an appointment to meet with the faculty members to learn more about the course. And I found it to be one of the most well-organized courses, just in depth, and clearly understood better why she then served as basically an advocate for not including all students. The course was, and I don't know, she's a member of the FAC. I hope this is okay with her. So I spent almost an hour and we walked through the course. I understood the guiding principles, the pedagogical approach, why she took the position she did. And I think for many of us, it is about communication. It's understanding what others are saying and why they're saying it, and ensuring that we're both really speaking to the same things. The other thing I will say, and then I'll open the floor here for any questions on ACME or with you, is that I received, and I said to CSET, I saw this note, there was a resolution that said the ACME policy was racist. Now that clearly I did not understand. And I said that to CSET, so I didn't even try to speak to the issue because clearly I just didn't understand. I didn't understand why someone would say that and based on what. And I think it's important that when we use these kinds of terms, that we all have an understanding, a definition of what we mean. When we say a policy is racist, when in fact, there really isn't any evidence, how can one make that argument? So that was the only area I didn't answer or attempt to answer or say, because quite frankly, if I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you. I don't know that answer now, but I will find out the correct, what the correct position is and get back with you. And that's what I tend to do. So the ACME policy is clearly one that I consider to be an anti-racist policy. Now, let me define what I mean, because I'm asking you to do the same. An anti-racist policy is any measure that produces or sustains racial equality between racial groups. If it does that, it is anti-racist. A racist policy is any measure that produces or sustains racial inequality between racial groups. So that's where we are on that. And I want to just tell you, I had the most insightful meeting with Dr. Long. I just found it was just really very, very informative. So as we talk and communicate, I think it's so beneficial that we have conversations as today we plan to have, as opposed to, and try to understand what the other is saying. And that's how we come to work collaboratively. And I think the end result is beneficial for all of us if we do that. I tend to be very collaborative. I think, I really do. Some of you, now Ron, I've met, some of you I've worked with in the past. I know who you are. Many of you, I know who you are. So I do tend to be collaborative, and I'm very much open to listening to what you're saying and to responding to you as transparently and as honestly as I can. So on that note, let's hear the questions, or if you want to, Chair Sasenka, if you want to either have someone respond or move to other concerns, because you wanted the free-flowing dialogue there. Initially, I wanted to know, now I'm a political scientist and public policy analyst. I wanted to know, okay, what do you want to talk to me about? I wanted to know in advance, like this and that. But then I conceded to Kalinas because she felt that it would be better if it were free-flowing. Given that I'm wearing two hats, by the way, one that's a very new hat. As provost, clearly I understand what's happening on the academic student affairs side, and I've had to get up to speed wearing the interim CSCU president's hat. So I am open to any free-flowing dialogue at this point. Okay, guys.
Well, thank you for being open to that.
Yes.
And so that said, I guess I'll just ask anyone who would like to respond or have questions to jump in. And thank you for the clarifications. There certainly did give the impression that only, that we were not using multiple measures, and that certainly was a perception. I also want to just acknowledge the fact that we have a couple of guests, right? Greg,
Yes.
hi, good to see you, and Ken, hello. Yeah, anyone who'd like to jump in or ask questions, I'm certainly not the Acme person. Go ahead. If it gets wild, I'll put us in order.
I guess I'll start since, I'm a loudmouth anyway. But I think to answer your question, Jane, about the racism, I don't know who posted that or who said that, but I think I understand the background. I think I understand the concerns people have. PA 1240. Well, first of all, everyone knows, right, that students of color are overrepresented in our developmental programs, right? They're overrepresented due to inequity in our K through 12 system, right? So anything that affects our developmental programs affects students of color disproportionately, right? And so I think if this fails, if it doesn't work, right? If this idea doesn't work, it is going to affect our students of color disproportionately. And one of the great things about PA 1240, which I worked on quite a bit, was that PA 1240 was an experiment that was carried out throughout 12 different institutions. And we all learned from each other. We learned what worked. We learned what didn't work. If it didn't work at one college, then obviously we weren't going to try that at another college. If it worked at one college, we would transport it to another college, and so there was some experimentation similar to the way in which states pass laws and bills that they try out and they pilot programs, and then they expands and the federal government picks it up sometimes. And I think that was helpful, because if it failed in some way, our students at a certain institution, it was only failing that little, that 1/12. Whereas the big worry is that this is for all the entire colleges. So if it fails everyone. It fails massively, and it fails students of color disproportionately. So I think that's one concern people have. We have our fingers crossed. Hopefully it works, right? But I think the other concern was the math folks. And because I hear from everybody, because I'm faculty senate president, so I hear from all these folks, and the math people were talking to me quite a bit, and they're very concerned about that quantitative literacy course. And they were concerned that algebra was going to be, not a possibility for many students. And they saw a possibility. For me, it goes back to the debate between Booker T. Washington and Du Bois, right? Where Du Bois was, let's allow the best and brightest of our race, right? And Booker T's, let's just do technical training. That's what, African Americans, all they need is technical training. And so I think there is a big concern that if we create a track that's not a transfer track, that if there are any options within any of our programs that restrict students from transfer, and that will not transfer, and the CSUs are saying they would never take a quantitative literacy course as a transfer course. If that happens, then our students are precluded. It makes transfer much more difficult for them. And as we know, again, students who are through no fault of their own, through the fault of our unjust distribution of educational resources at the K through 12 level, come in unprepared. They tend to be disproportionately students of color. And so anything that holds them back from transfer, holds them back from a bachelor's degree, holds them back from a master's degree or a PhD or whatever they want, that concerns us, that worries us. So I think that might have been where that came from, but I don't know.
Well, and I understand your concern. Again, I believe I have a research paper that was just published fall 2020. I think there are 19 mathematical organizations in the country that support the co-requisite versus the prerequisite. I'm going to send this to you guys. I have the results from 3 states that have implemented this, and students who are also with minority students in these institutions, and it all showed very positive results. So this is not something we take lightly. I'm an empiricist. I'm going to look for the data. I looked at the data. I looked for the HIPs to determine where this is taking place and the results. So this study, that's the case for change in developmental mathematics education, I will send to you with all of the bibliographic references here. I think it's going to be about, either I'll have Greg or someone send us 29 pages. And it covers in detail what you're concerned about. But I very much appreciate, Juan, your concern, because we all have to be concerned about making a situation far worse for all of our students. So I get that. But again, I'm also out of public policy. So what I think is being said here is that we're really talking about impact, but we're presupposing what the impact will be, because the intent is positive, but the impact, and so what I hear individuals saying is that they believe possibly that the impact could be more injurious on a negative rate on students of color or from minoritized populations. But I have studies 3 that show just the opposite occurred. And the reason for that, I think everybody's familiar with grit. Everybody's familiar with how we onboard our students. And let me tell you, this came directly from my first-hand experience working at an HBCU. Many of those students would never have been admitted to the majority institutions because their scores, ACT scores, this is out of Georgia, were much lower than the admission criteria. However, I worked with those students, and I saw by having a positive culture and encouraging those students and providing supplemental support. They didn't finish in 4 years. Some didn't finish in 5, but guess what? They finished and they progressed. A lot of it has to do too with the affective variables here, not just the scores that we have. If a student has to believe, he or she, that they can attain. Efficacy makes a difference. And this is particularly true for students who come from first-gen families, and from minoritized populations. There is a lot of literature that speaks to this. I've seen it firsthand, but I also know that I take your concern and I hear what you're saying very, very clearly, what you're saying. What I'd like to do is get to a place where once I provided these additional studies, research, we can then have another conversation to determine if, in fact, perhaps it won't be as detrimental. But I also know, and I just printed out something. Here we go. I found the results from the CSAT. I have lots of stacks of paper here that in response to that feedback, that there was a change in the design of the ACME policy, revisions to, you don't have the policy before you, so it's unfair to just refer to the sections that clarify the policy, but the mathematics pathways will be developed to align mathematics requirements with student program of study career goals, and that's going to be by the faculty members. The faculty will be the ones at an all gateway course. The major requirements were that all gateway college level course transfer English and math courses will be offered with co-requisite support rather than prerequisite. So in response, that was initially, in response to the feedback being expressed by those members, the revisions read now, transitional programs to more clearly charge transitional programs coordinators flexibility to work with mathematics and English faculty to design supports for students in most need. So we've added another layer there, tier, in response to what you've said. And I think this is speaking to your point around the transitional piece. So, and then PA 1240 as well. So that was added. Now let me put on my glasses here, guys. This is, you know, it's required here to make sure I'm reading all this correctly. And the English learners, to clarify that charge there, the program needs to be designed to allow ELL students to complete gateway college level transferable English and mathematics courses in 2 years. So it's gonna lengthen that amount of time that ELL students need, which is, to me, seems quite rational. Another change that was made here that I think will be forthcoming here, I'm looking, and this is clarifying the degree of flexibility in combining measures to place students above the level of gateway type courses. Mathematics faculty are required to determine a high school GPA for placement into level of support for the gateway college level transferable mathematics courses, that section. Mathematics faculty can designate a combination of measures to determine placement above the level of the gateway college level transferable mathematics course. It's all the faculty are the ones who are making the determination. And in response to that feedback, revisions to several sections that mention the guided self-placement process to remove specific elements from the policy and assign agency to a group to design this process. So it's coming back. It's coming back. And that's what we should do. That's why we have, it's called a draft. And the other thing I like about this team I'm working with on the community college side here is that they are willing to listen to the feedback and to modify based upon the information they've received. Now, I've also received an invitation, I got it again from the CMAC, and they want to meet with me in March, and I'm going to be very happy again. I will very happily meet with them because I really find this to be the dialogue very constructive because it helps all of us create a better product to serve our students. You're the ones who are engaged day to day in teaching our students, just as I was. You know your students, and that's what Dr. Long shared with me. She's the one in those courses every day in the remedial courses. She's working with her students. She knows who they are. She knows what the challenges are. So never would I ever question the veracity of the validity of what she recommends or moves forward, because I've seen her course. Right? It was just really marvelous. So well organized. And it's a model. I think it should be shared, if not, just across the system. I don't know whether you guys have seen it, but you should. It's just an excellent course. So I was so convinced, because you're all passionate about our students. I get it. But keep in mind, we're as passionate as are you. We want to make sure our students' our students are successful, and that we're able, guys, to move the mark on completion rates. And the other thing I will say here, I want you all to recall why we're where we are today. I don't know that, Kalina, you were on board in 2016. When did you join the CSCU system?
2017.
Okay, well, in 2016, before you came, it was NEASC who said 19 of the 12 looked at the outcomes, the completion rates. They were the ones who initially said there are problems that must be addressed. And I get it that we can't always quantify what a completion of a course or attending an institution really means. I'm a social scientist, just like we can't put a dollar value on a person who gets a pair of shoes for the first time. I mean, you know, it's really difficult, but there are markers, there are metrics. This all begun, it didn't start with the Board of Regents. Let's get that clear. This was all begun with findings there from Netchi, and it was NEASC then at that time. Barbara Brittingham came, she spoke to all of us in an open meeting. So that was the beginning, and this was the board's response to what NEASC findings or Netchi's findings were. What we're all trying to do, and I think we all have this in common. We're all trying to ensure that we improve those completion rates and that we serve better that our students, and I have no doubt that individually, you're all very passionate about what you're doing. That is not in question. What I think is, however, are the practices that are in place. We haven't looked at what our policies are, the impact of the policies within our institutions, the practices. Classic example, AccuPlacer. I mean, I have data from, and even math, the CMAC, that AccuPlacer does not correlate with students' performance, but yet everybody was using it, you know? And so if there is no correlation, the question is why? Why are we using it? This exercise, what we're doing now in the proposal, causes all of us to look more in depth. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to go on and on here, but I too am very passionate about wanting to work with you and to ensure that our students are successful. And this is, and the focus has been on the community colleges. The graduation rates for our universities are in the 50th percentile and up. So but we do need our universities, by the way, Dr. Blips, we do need our universities to support and cooperate with what we're moving forward, some of these changes from the community colleges as we modify them. And that's why we have had on the ACME policy representatives from the universities. The provost from Southern was one of the members. Is anyone there from Southern? Where's Mike? Was on this ACME council. So it's not as if we are in any way attempting to only focus on the community college. We have involved the universities as well, but it's just a matter of looking at how can we do things differently to move that needle, and that has to be moved. We must improve our completion rates. Now, and what we've done at the system level, we are employing, and you guys are familiar with this, I think Kalina and David, the student assessment measure, and probably you too, Ron, because you're out of IR. So we are looking at that. We're looking at not only the students who complete at the community college, we're looking at those and including those who transfer to the universities, while the federal government IPAS data only looks at first-time, full-time students. So we are making an effort to try to capture what you do, how well you are doing, which of course is a very different reflection than what we see with the IPAS data typically. Well, I think that was a long explanation there, but guys, I am a social scientist, so but are there any questions from that?
Well, Jen's hand is up.
Jen's up.
Hi, was traveling, so I'm sorry my video's off. But Dr. Gates, thank you so much for your kind words. And I don't want to be redundant to the previous conversation we had, but since Ken Kluchnik is on with us and in the hopes of creating more richness to this discussion, I just wanted to one last time make a pitch to advocate for developmental in this way. So if you look at the PA 1240 data, it shows that at the 101S or the embedded level, that students did better after PA 1240 happened, but at the English 096 or the developmental level, things remain pretty flat. And one of the things that we do so well, I think, with developmental pedagogy in Connecticut is we focus on fostering environments for intrinsic motivation and thinking about how to teach, in a way, even grit with those students. We're trying to teach 9th through 12th grade in a one-room schoolhouse with students also being funneled in straight from ESOL. And it's really hard. And I appreciate that you appreciated the depths in which the course is laid out and scaffolded to integrate reading, writing, critical thinking, and information literacy and scaffold those skills across the semester. It's very, very hard. So I don't think that anyone is arguing that that top group of students who maybe could have placed in composition or college level writing, that they won't succeed in a better way with your initiative. I think the concern is that lower percentage of students who don't have the grit right now. They don't have the intrinsic motivation. And frankly, they don't have the reading skills to even come in at a 9th grade level. And I think the bigger concern from the developmental English faculty side, I'll just speak to that, is for those students to go right into college level classes with instructors who aren't trained in developmental pedagogy. And it's very easy if there's 3 or 4 in a class for instructors to get overwhelmed by the level in where the students are starting and not know how to scaffold those skills. And I think the concern of the quote unquote just-in-time intervention for those students is likely to not be enough because of how incredibly difficult it is, even with 6 credits and an embedded tutor, to teach someone how to move from like 6th, 7th, or 8th grade reading through 12th grade in 1 or 2 semesters. So for me, I know I talked about this with you, for the many faculty, we don't have the burden of caring as much about graduation rates. We care about the content of what the individual is learning, and it's a different perspective. So I think for us, the concern is for those students who we see with so much grit and potential, who try so hard, but they just really struggle with learning disabilities and language acquisition, et cetera. What will they lose if we take away the developmental expertise and it's thinned out across the system and the burden of everything that has to be covered in the college level courses? And so I guess I would just say that if there's any way, and I think I mentioned this to you, the students, if this is going to happen anyway, if they go into the college classes and they don't pass after 2 semesters, could there be something developed where they have another chance? Because many of these students need reading instruction. And one thing that CSET has argued for a long time, back when I worked on CSET with Ken, was that we should have readers. If we could have readers for the placement exams, we could place students properly so much better, but it costs money. So I know, sorry, that was long-winded, but I think at the end of the day, the one thing that I really wanted to speak to is that, like Ron said, most of the students that we're highlighting in that lower skill level group are students of color. And that's, I think, the big concern. And I just know, after working with colleagues who teach comp for so long, that it's very, very hard to get people to read college level text and infer and pull out quotes and create their own thesis statements if they can barely read a 5-paragraph essay. And
Sure,
so,
yes, and I certainly appreciate, actually, I very much appreciated the time I spent with you, and it gave me a clearer understanding of why those positions were being articulated. I do recall, I think in the CSET meeting, that Southern has said they are adding a reading component. So I think the emphasis on reading is also equally as important. What I did was went back to the staff and said, look, Fran has been one of the ones I contact with in the on the CSCC side. This is what I heard. These are the concerns. Please work with the chairs. And I've also moved forward your name, Dr. Longjen, there to work with Ken and others so that they too will have, if I wasn't as clear as I should have been in expressing what I saw and observed, that you can directly work with those individuals who are the writers, who are looking at this. And honestly, they did respond to CSET. I'm not sure I've gotten the report from CMAC, so I'm going to very much look forward to meeting with them sometime in March. I don't know whether the date they gave me will work because sometimes the calendar's already populated, but I am looking forward to that. And I think that's our way forward, because what we all have in common, we all want our students to succeed. There's no doubt about that. But it's how we do it. It is the process. It is how we move forward. But what I can say is that what we have been doing doesn't work as well. It has to be improved, because we are evaluated by federal metrics. That is our real world. We understand why we're doing what we're doing. And I get it, Jan, that you guys are not concerned about focused on the completion rates or graduation rates, but the federal government is, the US Department of Ed is. Those people, and so that's where we're finding here sort of that tension. And it's our responsibility to work with you to try to make sure that we are able to assist you in moving the marker. I think, quite frankly, the reading focus is a great one, because reading it's just essential, whether you're in mathematics, which is a different form, or any other area there of as one pursues a degree or credentials. So I hear what you're saying. Let me just end by saying I very much hear what you're saying. I appreciate your perspective, and I definitely want to take that back to the teams that are working on this, and would invite Jen, and if there's someone else who chairs, I don't know whose area, and I specifically Jen, I think, with the CSET to get in contact with Ken, not Ken, because Ken's not really, it's not so much, it's a system level you should understand, as is over on the college side. But get in touch with Fran. Fran's gonna love me because she has a lot of emails that are coming in. But contact Fran Navarro and talk and make sure your points are also communicated to her, and try to work. If you guys will work with us, we're very much open to listening to what you have to say. And even if I were to offer a response, I'm very open to, after all, I'll say I'm a political scientist, social scientist. I take constructive criticism well. This constructive, I'm gonna listen, and I take that well, and we go back to the group to say, okay, this is evolving. It is a draft. We're willing to work, and we want you to work with us. I desperately want that to happen. I want you to work with us. Yes.
May I say one more? kind of give a
Yes.
Hail Mary pass.
Yes, okay.
Okay, so let me just say this because I appreciate the dialogue, and I just, so I can sleep at night, I'll just say this, and it probably won't come out great, but I'll just sort of go, I'm going to be vulnerable. Okay, so I would liken college comp to imagine that's the Olympics, okay, and we're running, okay, and then in developmental, I don't want this to sound bad, but it's almost like the students are coming in and they're completely out of shape, and some of them really can't walk at all, okay, and we're expecting to say, okay, well, if we add a credit of reading or something, then they can get there in 15 weeks or 30 weeks. And I think the disconnect, and I would be happy at any point to talk with Fran or Ken, Ken knows, or to show the student work, but I think that the misunderstanding is the actual skill level at which they're starting, and that teaching reading takes more time than the 15-week semester. And so I just wanted to say that out loud, but I appreciate you listening. I think I just don't see the reading piece getting resolved. And I've talked to so many students who are so demoralized and so sad about their inability to, where they read a paragraph over and over and over again, and you ask them, okay, what does that mean? What do you think? And you annotate it with them, and they will cry, and they'll sit with a text and they'll say, I can't get it. I don't understand. And it is so heartbreaking to see us potentially not serve the community that wants to increase their literacy at the sake of at the sake of thinking about only graduation rates, because I think there is value in teaching literacy to everybody, even if they can't make it. And I just don't want those students to get lost in the mix. And I know you get that, but I just wanted to say it in that way.
I
So
get
thank
it.
you so much.
I get it. And I too can agree with, I too can agree with the analogy there, particularly in being involved in the Olympics, because I wouldn't dare enter. Maybe you have to be in great shape. So I get it. That's a great visual. But what I will say is that there are students who are, in my opinion, misplaced. They're displaced because if there is a score, a standardized score that is a normed reference based on that structure, as opposed to being criterion reference, many students of minoritized populations are misplaced. They're placed in remediation and shouldn't be there, who could very well, in a co-requisite model, succeed. One example of this came out of Texas in a physics course, where the faculty member, if you guys, I don't know which of the community college, but I held the picture of an African-American female student who did well in high school. Her high school grades were great, but when she entered, it may have been Texas A&M, she really did not. She didn't seem to do as well in the course, and thought, well, maybe I don't belong here. Again, this is this whole grit, whether or not people enter with a negative, with the whole fixed mindset or growth mindset. And while she thought she had one, but she ended with it sort of like thinking she couldn't do it. But the faculty member, a white male physics teacher, said, look, I know we can do better. What he did was kept that student and other students who were struggling of color, added additional work in that physics class. 4 years later, those students were performing at the same rate as students who entered normally. Now, I'm going to share that research with you as well. So faculty members, we make the difference. And Jen, I get it. There's some individuals who enter who are among the underserved students who really don't have the skill set, but there are others who are misplaced, who could succeed with the co-requisite model. I see, Kalina, you're saying something.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second.
Sorry, I'm so what I'm saying, guys, is that I have worked with, I can't read that. Someone saying something could be because,
I don't actually see that.
yeah, there are, you don't see that? I think it's not coming in.
Might I suggest, while we're looking for that that in the last few minutes, I see that Fred Latour is here as a
Fred
guest.
has a hand up.
He's a
Yeah.
mathematician from Central who's president of the Senate. So maybe we should have him speak just before you leave.
Oh, okay. I'm
That sounds
certainly
good.
all ears to hear someone from Central.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is that, first of all, when you, I know you said that this policy is a community college policy and doesn't really affect the CSU. But at the same time, you are saying it's something that I'm reading in the policy. By default, the first mathematics course a community college student will take will be a gateway college level transferable course. And transferable means it can be transferred and applied to a general education program or the major at the CSUs. If you're going to make that promise, you need the CSUs involved. You need to get our feedback. I wasn't even able to submit feedback through the portal because it gave me an error message. And so, I mean, CSU involvement is critical if you want to make sure that the courses get transferred. The other thing is that CCSU actually is the one institution in the system that has actually tried a similar model of having two different tracks of courses at the introductory level, for mathematics. And the thing is that we only have two tracks, and we're always looking at the data to make sure our students being, successful. Is the new model successful? I mean, the thing is that this is not one of those things that can be done overnight. It's something that is done by looking at the data. I mean,
Correct.
over lots of time. But the thing is that when we created that model, we only have two tracks, and yet we were really worried that we would be steering students that have never thought that they could succeed in a STEM discipline into the lower level course. That was like the number one concern. So I'm echoing the concerns that everybody has stated. If you have here more than two paths, which seems to be the implication from looking at the ACME policy, then, I mean, there's going to be even more concerns that you might have students, including students who from poor backgrounds, minority backgrounds, who have never thought that they would succeed in a STEM discipline, and they're not even going to try because they took the course that doesn't lead to a STEM discipline. So, I mean, the thing is that I understand that there's just that there's a desire to improve our retention and graduation rate. But at the same time, you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And the other thing is that when you say AccuPlacer is not very accurate, why do we still use it? Part of the reason is that I think a lot of us, I can't speak for the community colleges, but I know some people would like to develop our own test or our own measurement for placing students more accurately. The problem is that that will require most likely resources. And of course, I'm not, that's one of the issues. I mean, would the board be willing to commit resources to that? I mean, I know that that's a difficult question, but I mean, I think that, why do we use it? I think it's probably because we don't have the time, the resources to develop our own. So, I mean, I guess these are just a few points that I wanted to make, but I just want to make sure that it's understood that this draft policy, I understand it's a draft, but the feeling that I got from talking to to the math faculty at community colleges and the CSUs is that involvement from faculty in drafting the policy was minimal. I know that there were people that participated. They left because they felt that their voice wasn't being heard. Some people stayed till the end. And, the point is that the involvement of faculty, especially in mathematics, in drafting the ACME policy draft was very small.
Well, you know what, sir, I really appreciate your comments here, but there were people from the universities involved in I attended two of the meetings myself and brought welcome. One was at Southern Connecticut State University. The other, I think, was at Middlesex Community College. Had a really horrible sore throat, but I was there to bring the welcome to the group. And that was a room full. So, and there were faculty in those meetings. So I am uncertain why someone believes that I can't control what one believes if they didn't think someone was not taking seriously their input or their recommendations, but I do know for a fact because I saw them. I saw faculty mathematics faculty from Western Connecticut State University. I was there for at least 2 of those meetings. So that information isn't accurate, but I do very much appreciate what you were saying, that those pathways, I thought was made very clear. For STEM majors, everyone clearly understands calculus-based algebra is absolutely essential. We get that. That is not an issue. But for persons who are in other areas, when I'm thinking, for example, criminal justice and criminology, I just spoke to a legislator the other week who told me her daughter is in an education program, and she was given a choice at Penn State which of the mathematic courses would both meet the area of study. She chose finance. And so this is not in itself an unusual model. What we have to do is find something that works. And I don't know that anyone ever said, yes, the community colleges we're developing, we're looking at ACME, but clearly transferability requires cooperation, collaboration, because the faculty at the CSUs at the end of the day must be the one to assess the outcomes and what your expectations are for the transferability of those courses. Now, guys, I'm sorry. I love chatting with you. I have a hard stop at 2. I'm already 32 minutes late for my next meeting, but you know what? Invite me back when I get a minute, and I will come back. And I definitely want to have a conversation with you one-on-one. Let's see, out of Central, Dr. I would very much love to have a follow-up conversation there as well in our group. Because you're right, you're the only CSU institution that has this type model. And I was very pleased to hear that when I visited Central at one of the faculty conferences. That's when it was first demonstrated. So Central has been very progressive and innovative in that area. Guys, look, Kalina and David, I am so sorry if you didn't get a chance, but I have information coming to you, David, that you asked about on the endorsement thing. I have lots of things, but I am definitely following up on that. And I've got to run. This is a HR matter, and I'm 32 minutes late, but I want to thank you very much for allowing me to chat with you. Okay, I'm going to end now.
Thank you so much, Jane, and I will share the research with the group. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you, Kalina. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Does seem like we could talk about that forever. Right. Oh, let's see. We lost. Did we lose Greg? Did we? Yep, we lost Greg also. And it's still here. How are we doing? Okay. I guess we can move on to the next topic if we're good with that, which I believe are the chair and vice chair reports. So let's see. Seems like there's been quite a bit. I'll try to be quick, and I will share this with, because there's some links here. I will share it with Lois after the fact. But so there was a meeting of the Board Academic and Student Affairs Committee on February 5th, and there is a new change to the academic programming approval policy. Concept papers are now optional, and there's a bit of, it's a little bit more streamlined than it used to be. Apparently that was at the request of certain colleges that wanted to speed up or facilitate the process. That's on page 86 of that agenda. There was also an update on Students First, and I shared with you the new schedule of updates on Students First. I think at the last meeting, we noted the fact that in December, when David and I presented comments about Students First, we were told that we would get, or the board would get an update that responded to the questions asked in January of this year. But there was never any board meeting scheduled, and we weren't sure how that was going to happen. So in early February, we got an email, or all board members got an email with a schedule of the planned update, which I did share with you, and it would be too much trouble to screen share that at the moment. So, but it is attached to the agenda, right? So the first of those updates was provided at the ASA meeting on February 5th. The Netchi update will happen in June this year, not in April. The turnaround, there are going to be like 15 programs, aligned programs coming out of the, I don't know, the alignment process in the next month or so. I think it should be happening now, but I haven't actually heard anything other than the report that it will be happening. So maybe let me know if you have seen any of these programs. But there are going to be 15 of them, and we're supposed to be following the TAP process, which usually means that each college will let it go through their governance process as they see fit. So usually departments, curriculum, and then endorsement at the level of a Senate or council or whatever we have at the colleges. The thing is that I believe that they're asking for it to be returned in 1 month, which appears to make that completely impossible, right? And when I mentioned that at the meeting, the response was, well, I guess it's getting real. So it's important for those of us at colleges who think that we want to pass this through a governance process. We're going to have to figure out how that is possible, because it's entirely possible that if we do in fact pass it through the governance processes, we'll have no input because it will move ahead in a month. That's what I've been told. Then again, I haven't actually seen any of these materialize. Maybe there'll be adjustments. I don't know. So has anyone seen these? Go ahead, Mary Beth.
Yeah, so I'm on curriculum and standards at my school, and we, at our last meeting, which was just, I guess it was last Thursday, not yesterday, the faculty member on our campus who is the APRC, is that the right acronym? I think it is. Yep. He came and spoke with us, and he brought with him a link that goes to basically where all these programs are going to be housed as they're going through the APRC. And so at that point, he was showing us, I'm going to forget exactly. I know it was criminal justice, 2 different criminal justice programs. And then I think it was like phlebotomy maybe, or there was a few other programs that, didn't really pertain to our school because we don't offer them. And so he basically explained that as they go through the APRC, they were going to get moved to the college campuses. Curriculum and standards committees are going to then have the ability to do one of 3 things. They can endorse it, not endorse it, or choose not to vote. And so for all 3 of those things, that's the choice. And the 30 days is what we were told as well. And we were also told that like 15 or so music programs were going to be, approved the following week. So that means, that we're up to basically like 20 that we would have to then approve before, the end of the 30 days. So I'm not exactly sure. Our committee was basically like, we're not really sure what we're supposed to be doing with this at this point. And so the question is, I think we're bringing it up at our next meeting, whether we need to schedule more curriculum and standards meetings to get through all of this and how we're going to deal with it. And then another question is, like these 15 music programs that are going to come through have nothing to do with Untuck, right? We don't offer those programs at all. So do we not vote on those? Do we endorse them? Do we spend our time looking through them? Because, once we're one college, they will potentially affect us, but at the same time, we know nothing about them. We have no faculty in our campuses that have any knowledge about them. So to say it's good or not good is, difficult. So that's kind of where we are. We don't have any answers at this point, but that's just basically what we discussed at our last meeting as far as how this is all gonna go down.
Okay. So that 30-day clock might be ticking at the moment.
It seemed like it.
Okay. All right. I'll just put this up. Okay. I'll just give you my my notes so I can keep track. Right. So okay. So the turnaround time is 1 month. I don't know what that means. I mean, it's not, as far as I know, the TAP model, but that has just been this ephemeral thing for quite some time now, and I think it amounts to saying that we will not have a chance to put it through governance adequately at any of our colleges, because we just can't shift meetings like that. I think I also shared with you the email that went out at the colleges about reporting lines being transferred to the associate vice president of the CSCC, which was kind of a change. It was for many of us. Trying to check exactly how many. I think there will be 54 people total affected by that, and it comes into full effect on March 26th. So Allison Buckley presented on that. She said the reason that change is happening now is simply that moving things sooner rather than later is less disruptive, so it's a more gradual change. But two other motivations that she gave did kind of, I don't know, didn't quite make as much sense to me. So another motivation was that many colleges are resource constrained. And I think she mentioned that there are sometimes, one person doing the job of two or something like that, and that enrollment has become a problem. So, I mean, the way that hit me when I heard it was that, since we're being assured that this is just a change in supervisory lines, no change in job title, no change in supervisor, no change in duties, those two things put together struck me as saying that while we acknowledge that there are resource issues at the colleges, we don't actually intend to address them, though we are shifting things on paper. That's what it felt like. So she did say that the shift allowed for a more efficient structure that ideally would fill those gaps. So we'll see. So we also had, David and I had a meeting with Matt Fleury, Merle Harris, Jane Gates, and Alice Pritchard. And we'll talk more about that later on. That was the result of efforts mostly guided by David for quite some time now about improving our relations with the board. And hold on, I just saw, because I'm sharing my screen, I can't see everyone. So Ron, you had your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question for those who have received the 2 CJ programs and certificates or whatever programs. I watched the BOR meeting this morning, okay, and I noticed that the criminal justice program was presented, and they said that they had created, I think, 5 courses. So are those courses also going through this endorsement process? Have those of you who have seen the CJ programs, have you also seen course proposals? Are these proposals being put forward using the BOR new course proposal form and the new program proposal form? Because those forms have a lot of information that would make it helpful for us to determine whether this is a viable program or a viable course. And I would think if the BOR requires all new programs and all new courses to use their forms, they would that would be the same requirement for these new courses and these new programs, because we do need that information. Our curriculum committee focuses on every last detail of those new program and new course forms. And so I think that's important. So is that what we're seeing when these things come through? I guess that's the question, because I haven't seen these yet.
I'm trying to find the link. I don't know the answer to your question at this point, but I'm going to try to find it and share it so you can take a look at it.
Great. And Fran was going to say something, but you look like you were going to respond, Mike, because you worked on the CJ, right?
Yeah, we did. And the 5 courses, and we did 141. So it's kind of a blur now because we spent all summer on it. And I would have to look back, but I think a couple of those, the 5 are combinations and one's a new one. We use the same format, I think, is that everybody's going to use that. It's I don't know if the BOR system office form where, the outcomes and how are you going to teach it online, LRON, all that. It's a basic form from what I remember. I'm having, I'm going to be meeting with Rebecca and then David on Monday, and she'll have it all. She pretty much houses the forms. They're on Teams. We'll get you the answer for it, but I don't think it's much different than an approved form, because we took, let's say, 10 CJ programs and we boiled down the outcomes and everything agreed upon to have one, which is the, the curriculum alignment there. And it was long overdue. So the 5 I would have to get back to you on, but I believe it's the same format.
First of all, Mike, the work that you did was, I mean, that's so much work. I just, I listened to you on the recording this morning, and I was like, wow, they did a lot of work, But I guess the reason why the BOR form is so critical to me is because it has things on it like, proposed program review schedule, who's going to be, sort of a planning for program review. It also has on it resources. Do all the colleges have the resources needed for these programs? And if there are changes to the program, does that affect the need for resources? It also has a workforce advisory committee, an industry advisory committee information. And so is this new program going to have a statewide advisory committee, or can you have, is it allowed to have advisory committees at every campus, or does there need to be one whole state advisory committee from in terms of industry and business? So all that kind of information goes into these forms. Yeah.
I have to tell you, I think that's got to be added on after the fact, because some of what you just told about is unfamiliar to me. I mean, it makes sense, but it's unfamiliar because we just dealt with the outcomes sort of like a syllabi of sorts, or outcomes. So I wonder if that was an added element that was put in later. I don't know. Administratively, I would have to look back, but I'll have a better answer for you Monday when I meet with Rebecca. And I can email you if you want, or David can. But I got to tell you, Ron, I understand. It makes sense. I have to tell you, Ron, there's at all these programs here. I mean, I can't take the full credit on this. Rebecca was so organized. She worked on this thing day and night. I cannot see even half of these programs getting through. It's just so much work, and it's only because, like I was saying, and the video, or the BOR, that we were a cohesive group to begin with. And there's other groups that shall remain nameless that just they can't get along to begin with. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know how I can't see it getting done. I really can't. And yeah. Anyway, I would stop there because I don't want to put my foot in my mouth.
That's the same message that's the same message I heard from my computer information systems faculty member who worked on it over the summer. She told me at the end of the day, she said it was a good paycheck for her, but she can't imagine that this is actually going to happen, because it's just the exact. That there's no way they're going to get agreement on any of this stuff, and most of these programs are not going to make it through. There's just no way to do it.
And then once you agree on it, then you got to sit down and do the work, and then you got to agree on that, and then come back. So there's a few more steps there, but yeah, we were motivated because we wanted control over it.
Go ahead, Fran.
Yeah, I think the fundamental problem has already been touched on. This process traps the governance bodies on the horns of a dilemma. They've got 2 choices. They can either be deliberative in looking at these programs, which means they're going to long exceed the 30-day time limit, which means their feedback will be ignored, I assume. or they can simply rush and not be deliberative and vote or not vote, I suppose. And to me, that's completely unacceptable. You know, really, the BOR needs to respect the local governance process. If it takes 3 months, it takes 3 months. If they want our feedback, they've got to respect that.
Well, I think again, I think they need to respect their own forms, right? I mean, if they have forms that require more information than what they're providing, right? They need to respect the fact that they set that process up for all other programs and all other courses. The state universities have to follow that process. Everybody has to follow that process except these consolidated or aligned programs. That does not seem to be a fair or legitimate process to follow if they're not using the forms that are required of everyone else. That's all.
And we can't make an informed decision without all that information and without the time to look at all the information.
And I would assume the forms are for a good reason, right? Because these are all things that need to be considered. Yes. So what we were told was that the catalog needs to be live by October 2022. And that means that they need to start building it on the back end this summer. So this stuff needs to get through, at least 15 of them this semester. But there are hundreds of programs. So, you know, Mike and Becca and Katie did a great job of presenting all the work and care they took with their program. And we also heard from music, right, the music program. But those are two, right, two groups in all these, you know, various groups. And one of the things that I think they emphasized was the need for that focus time between semesters in the summer and so on, which is just not going to happen. So I did ask how many of the groups actually had the benefit of that time, how many of those groups will have the benefit of that time. And there's a significant, I think I don't remember exactly how many, I want to say there's a good number of groups who have not so much as responded to Fran Rosselli Navarre's request to have this work done. Like it hasn't even begun. So the volume of the work really is an issue. Okay, so that was BOR ASA, or at least the things that stood out to me. Our meeting with Fleury Gates, Pritchard, and Harris. One of the things, so we met before, not exactly that group, but we'd met with leadership before to kind of figure out when our meetings should be scheduled, so that, because we always run into this issue where we're in the middle of a large board meeting and questioning things that already went through committee, right? So they would much prefer that things are just sort of formally approved at the board meeting, that substantive discussion happens at the committee level. But it doesn't always work well because our meetings don't fit into that pipeline perfectly. So we kind of meetings so that if anything came out of FAC, it could be presented at the board. However, that's not ideal because we still don't have the capacity to put anything on the board's agenda. So that actually, what would be more helpful is if we knew what was coming to the committees, could have that input at the committee level before it got to the board, to the whole board, right? And we have not arranged. And it's not clear that we can, right? So we might continue to have this issue of bringing up large issues, just having to like comment on them as opposed to really have substantive input as it goes forward. But we're attempting to address that issue. About our relations with the board, that has its own item, because we'll talk about that later. There are a few other little things aside from how we will interact with the board and what the statute require of us at the board level, that we came up simply that we will just meet again in about a month to try to, as we try to refine. We might have to put some more thought into how we schedule our meetings so that we can have input, but to ASA other than like, you know, or to the finance committee before like a week before that meeting for proper discussion. So I know that there was a suggestion that I'm academic council meetings so that we'll know what is coming to ASA before it gets there, and we can. Don't know that there's an analogous solution for David and the Finance and Infrastructure Committee, but that's at least a start for now. Chairman Fleury has offered that when we present our reports to the board twice a year, we're still at that's still where we are. We'll talk about that some more. But when we present our reports to the board twice a year, there will be time scheduled into that board meeting so that we can actually have discussion as opposed to just quickly delivering a report and moving on, as we did in December. So hopefully that'll improve things somewhat. We also suggested that maybe we will provide our report to the board. I think traditionally we've done it like in April or May. We'll do it in June this year. So it's like 6 months and 6 months. As far as the legislature, so there are a lot of bills that affect us, and I just wanted to mention them. There are 3 bills that address mergers and closings, and they are SB 387, HB 5900, and HB 6403. All of them ask for legislative approval of closures and mergers. There's HB 5545, which is about the transparency for the system office budget, which currently is just sort of carved off of our block grant. Then HB 5465, which is about addressing the problem of fringe benefits costs that have just kind of sat on the books for years. 6402 is a study bill that proposes that we look at the structure of the CSCU system in the BOR and potentially propose alternative structures, and we'll talk about that later on. 6403 is about funding PACT. 6230 is about having 2 more students as voting members on the board. There are others. There's like, you know, for health insurance for part-timers. That hearing was yesterday, and I don't have that number. And then as far as finance and infrastructure, David will say more. There was the Students First update, which is its own item on our agenda. And then I just want to highlight our funding needs because there are going to be, I think it's March 4th, will be like the appropriation stuff for our system. But these are the needs that Ben Barnes highlighted for the system, the unique current needs, in addition to the more general need that our system hasn't been funded adequately for quite some time. And it's that we need supplemental fringe benefit funding from the state again. We had it for the last couple of years to the tune of about $20 million that just hasn't been restored for this year. That's an issue. I think what's under consideration now is $6 million for PACT, but that's not going to cover PACT into the future. Every year you add a new crop of students, we need at least 12 million at this point. There's a 27th payroll in 2023 that was covered for most other payrolls in the state, but is not covered for higher ed. So CSCU and UConn both have this issue of a 27th payroll that's not covered. While the one-time funds that we have to cover the pandemic are helpful, we're going to need recurring funds because enrollment is down and we rely on tuition to keep us afloat. So that is all I have at the moment. But I will encourage anyone, you know, to share those needs and and just the more general funding issues with folks. I think it's really important that we advocate for more funding for the system in general, since, you know, even what Jen was talking about in terms of just everything, we know we need it. So yeah, that's it for me. David? You're muted, David.
Here I am, unmuted. So we're going to talk about the relationship between the BOR and the FAC in a later agenda item, so I'll skip that. Although I will note that for the last board meeting, I did propose an amendment to the minutes, because for the December meeting, when we gave our report, the sum total of the statement in the minutes was faculty advisory committee chair David Blitz and vice chair Kalina Sasenka offered remarks focusing on the FAC's report to the board. Chair Fleury thanked them. So all of the 24 pages and the 10 to 15 minutes of presentation that we made was omitted. However, then President Ojekian's response to us on 4 points covering 22 lines of text was included. So I sent, following our decision to not bring things up abruptly at the board, but bring it up in advance, I sent in advance to Chair Fleury and to Kalina, to Pam Helene, who's the secretary, stating that I wanted an addition to it in two respects. One, to add a paragraph briefly just giving some of the highlights of the topics that we mentioned, and two, a proper link to the report, because in the advance minutes for the meeting, there was a link to our report, but unfortunately it was an incorrect link, and what you did was ended up downloading the minutes, the agenda for the previous board meeting. So what I had included was FAC Chair Blitz and Vice Chair Sasanker reported on FAC concerns on a number of issues, including the doubling of levels of management at the community college level, doubling of the system office controlled budget, reduction of faculty role in curriculum and shared governance, micromanagement by the board, in brackets, budget amendment, college and career success course, and lack of review and revision of major policies by the board, in brackets, students first. Suggestions for improvement of the relations between the FAC and the board were proposed, in brackets, joint meetings and regular reports, and a set of 10 guiding principles for public higher education was presented. And they agreed to do that. And in fact, at that point in the meeting, it was kind of interesting because we had previous to that 15 faculty in the public commentary who, I can't use any other terminology, but blasted the board for the collective agreement proposals. So by that point, I think perhaps Chair Fleury felt he was a little bit under the gun, but in any case, he did make the amendment, and it was proposed by a voting member of the board and approved. So I think that's our first amendment, mind you, to the minutes that we've ever had approved. Clearly, we want to move forward to a much more active role in assisting the board, as Section 185 says we are entitled and responsible to do. Secondly, I attended the previous joint meeting of the Finance and Infrastructure Committee and the HR Committee. And that was largely because Naomi Cohen, who's chair of the HR Committee, wanted to present have the 3 regional presidents present give a summary of what they've done in terms of external funds they've been able to win, and various other measures. And so they had a PowerPoint on it, which was, I said at the time, informative and interesting. And the point which I made was, we really have to look at the system of public higher education in the state at 3 levels: the central level, the regional level, and the local level. Clearly, they've taken some steps to develop matters at the regional level, and that may have some interesting consequences in terms of sharing of resources. But the other thing I pointed out is that there is an over-centralization in terms of budget and in terms of control exercised by the central leadership, And secondly, a term which I may have invented for the occasion, a delocalization. That is to say, what faculty are protesting about, and this is a legitimate concern that has to be taken fully into account, is one, the disaccreditation of the local campuses, community colleges, to which they have a sense of loyalty and in which they have invested years of their efforts, and which can't be discounted simply by saying, you know, one is better. And secondly, faculty control over curriculum. So I think perhaps that's something to which I want to return, because clearly, if we are going to achieve any positive result from the discussions, the debates, and for that matter, the arguments we have with them, it's going to have to be in terms of reframing the discussion. And the way in which I'm attempting to reframe it is to say, in any complex hierarchical system, doesn't matter whether it's the public higher education in the state of Connecticut, Part 2, or whether it's a company, or whether it's some other university, it doesn't matter. You have at least three levels: central, regional, and local. Right? And in the case of the CSU system, they are seriously out of kilter because of over-centralization and delocalization. And so that's something to which I plan to return. Other than that, I'm just looking here at my notes. That's probably the two most important things. In terms of just budget itself, there were two issues which I raised. One in the at the committee. One was the transition costs. There was at some point or other a slide that Ben Barnes presented, and it had transition costs for the CSCC as $1 million this year, then going down to $100,000 in subsequent years. And the point I made was, how could that possibly be? You've hired an interim president, an interim provost, interim vice presidents. You have 3 regional presidents. You're setting up a system office in downtown New Britain. That can't possibly be $100,000 next year. And the answer which I got, which I thought was, and even he I maybe thought was a little humorous, but I thought nonetheless it's something to which we have to come back, was, well, some previous CFO had set it up that way. So for example, changing the letterheads for the one community college, the only cost that would be taken into account as a transition cost is the graphic designer designing a new letterhead. Printing up the tens of thousands of pieces of paper would not be included. So apparently none of the salaries of the various levels of executive of the CSCC would also be included. So I said, well, I think we need to come back and return to that. The second point, which I brought up again at the board meeting, was I'd asked the question, where is shared services? Because that was the new item included in the October budget. And in fact, it was fairly substantial. It was $37 million. And that's what leads to, in effect, the doubling of the budget controlled at the central level, because they've gone from 2 line items, CCC, the old community colleges, and CSU support, to also include CSCC and now shared services. And so the question which I have, and to which he hasn't yet answered, but I asked that he answer it outside of the meeting because we were running out of time, is in the $35 million, which they now budget for shared services, $20 million is for salaries and fringe benefits, and $16 million for other expenses. And I always, my radar is usually activated when I see large sums for other expenses. And so I've asked what that is, and I'm awaiting a response from him. I'm hoping to get that next week. So those were 2 specifically finance-related issues. I think Kalina has brought up the more general issues about funding of the system and so forth in her remarks.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I forgot to mention that we actually got a chance to speak with Ben Barnes just a little bit to get more clarity on the needs for even things like, you know, the supplemental fringe benefit money to cover the unfunded pension liability, because that's an issue that's coming up in higher ed this year. And his recommendation has been that he thinks that for the community colleges, moving salaries out of the system entirely is the way to go. which causes me some anxiety. But that is his.
The fringes.
Yes, he believes that just put that on the state book so that we don't have to deal with that. So that because clearly our it's unreliable, right? It was covered for the past 2 years. It's not covered this year. I mean, I'm sure there are pros and cons, but that was what he had to say about it. And I will say also that I had asked him yesterday regarding what you just mentioned, David, about like implementation costs and so on, whether now that he has pointed out that our measure of implementation cost isn't particularly revealing, that maybe we might construct a new one that allows us to look very clearly at the investment in the consolidated college, because there's no need for that to not be transparent. And also asked for a baseline of savings that we could use, so that when we talk about there being savings with the consolidation, that we know what is meant by that. We'll see. I mean, I just asked. It's not something to which he responded, but yeah.
I should add one more thing, which was following the meeting with Fleury and Jane Gates and the two others. We did bring up at that point the Transfer Articulation Council, right, which we have discussed here in a number of times. And what I basically said, and I hope this is accurate, was that this was something that preceded Students First, but because of and it had been left out and had been disregarded by the system office for at least almost 2 years, which was a real shame, because it seemed to be something which, you know, has a potential to be beneficial. But because of the way in which faculty have been treated by the system office staff in terms of the other transitions involved in Students First, that faculty were not willing to participate in this. And I said that, you know, that has to be fixed up, number one. And number two, we asked for data on how many students are completing their pathways and being accepted into universities. And I mentioned that I had checked with one of the people, a faculty member, now working part-time in the dean's office at my university, as to what was the results from transfer articulation. And at least for Central, it was very small, in the dozens of people. I'm told she believed that, you know, Southern was being much more successful in terms of its bilateral relationship with Gateway, and that was one of a difference. But there was some skepticism as to, in fact, what positive impact the transfer articulation was having at this one particular university. So that's something we're going to come back to, and we're supposed to have a further meeting with them.
Carlina, can I just make a comment?
Go.
Sure.
Hi, sorry, I'm holding my cell phone here, so that's why it was all wiggly. First of all, you know, thank you for having Dr. Gates on, and for the comments that you made regarding your attendance at the meeting, and the fact, you know, your comments about how they put you in the minutes is, I think, just reflective and indicative of, you know, pretty much this entire last number of years. And, you know, and what I'm going to say is not at all related to Dr. Gates in disparaging her. I'm speaking in terms of the BOR. So I appreciate the fact that she came today. However, you know, like I said, I think it's indicative of really the BOR's thoughts of the community college. You know, the first thing I would say is the way I interpreted some of her comments this morning, or again, the BOR's comments, is kind of this divide and conquer now, because this is the community college's problem. This is the community college's issue. These are community college students. And so you people at the universities don't need to really worry about that. So I'm very glad that that the chair of your mathematics department spoke up on that. And I and all of us community college faculty, you know that we all greatly appreciate the involvement of the universities, because as we know, it's going to happen to you next, and then we'll fight for you. So anyway, you know, I saw that as kind of a divide and conquer relative to, well, this is not your problem, universities, you don't need to worry about this. But, you know, I found it also interesting, the remarks regarding a lot, am I still on? I don't see that if I'm still on here.
Yes, you're on.
Your video's
Sorry,
on,
my
but
video,
we can hear
yeah,
you
my
now.
video went. Okay. You know, a lot of the remarks this morning, you know, and the thank yous, and I get that. But I also heard several comments, again, along these lines of, well, we're all interested in the same thing. We're all interested in what's best for our students. And I heard that several times. Again, not against Dr. Gates, speaking in behalf of the board. But, you know, when the rubber hits the road, like you just said, David, that is not at all their intent. It is thank you. We're all, you know, interested in the same outcome, the interests of our students, but we as faculty has been dismissed and even disparaged in these meetings time and time again. So those of us that are actually in the classrooms who are interested in the outcomes of our students, we have been dismissed. Now I know the argument is, well, there are faculty that work with us, and I know that, but most of us have withdrawn and things like that. And you know, the opinion piece that was in the paper this week that we all signed spoke to that issue. So I'm sorry I'm being kind of jumbled here. I've got some things going on outside of the camera. But so I just wanted to make that point that I think that, you know, just the fact that it was, yeah, there was a couple of people here from the FAC, I'm paraphrasing, in the minutes essentially, that is highly indicative of how they felt about the faculty input through this entire process. And again, this morning hearing, or this afternoon with Dr. Gates hearing, we're all in this together. We all have the same desires and the best interest of our students. But I just don't see it that way, because what they're really saying is, yes, we have the best interest, but even though you're in the classroom, do it our way. We know best. So thank you.
Go ahead, Sean.
Hi, all. My meeting for the negotiation team got canceled till next Friday, which I guess I'm really happy about. I just wanted to comment too on Dr. Gates's impression that because a provost from Southern was present at the ACME discussions, that there was input from the universities. And I guess I would put up a little red flag about that, because his participation was probably required and he was brand new to his job at the time. And for those of you that know Bob Present, know what kind of player he is when it comes to what he hopes for in the future for himself professionally. So I think that, you know, he's kind of a yes man when it comes to, you know, BOR, you know, what it is they kind of want to push over on us. So, you know, I was really glad to hear some of the questions that Jennifer posted, as well as some of the comments. And it was just very interesting to me to listen to her in her role as the interim president in response to those. So thank you. But I wanted to put that in some kind of focus for you all, because a lot of us at Southern kind of view this provost as a yes person. And, you know, that might just put it in a better perspective for you.
Thank you for that, Sean. Jen?
Yes, thank you, Sean. I completely agree. And I just wanted to mention that came up a lot in our recent CSET meeting, where faculty member after faculty member from different campuses stated their experience with, you know, coming in, not quite being sure of what the work was, attending meetings, putting in different points of view, and then being completely ignored, coming back from sessions the very next day and having the work being deleted, asking a thoughtful question and then watching, you know, have there be crickets across the room. And it just became really frustrating and impossible. And so many of us stepped off. We stopped doing the work. We had to go through HR to get our names removed from lists. It was tedious and complicated. And yet as each campus explained to Dr. Gates in the CSET meeting that was our experience, it just was like in one ear and out the other. It was amazing. So I don't know if there's some other way to package our stories, but it's kind of like that reality of, if I put 500 pages of developmental student work on her desk and said, how would you do this any better, right? It's the same kind of thing. Like, someone who can't write a sentence is going to go into comp now. So I just think that there are these huge jumps from reality, and I think we're all feeling it. And then it's difficult to figure out who the audience is. And it seemed a little off-putting to me that Ken came today to listen, but then left with no comment as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an observation.
Go ahead, Mary Beth.
I was just going to add, I think CMAC's response to ACME was pretty interesting, and I'll be curious. I'm not on the CMAC group this year or last year because it oftentimes conflicts with FAC, but I attend when their meetings happen to not conflict. And I hope to be able to attend the one where Jane Gates goes to speak to them. But the reason their response was so interesting is because they really laid it out in like a table where they said, this is what the ACME group, the math faculty who stayed with ACME to the end, this is what they recommended. And then right next to it in the table, this is what it said in the BOR policy. So it's really laid out there in terms of like this idea that everybody said nobody's listening to us, and they say, of course you were there, you were at the table, but it's really nicely spelled out as like, yeah, we were there and this is what we said, but that's not what you did. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation when she attends and can address that response. I hope. We'll see.
Mary Beth, could you send a copy of that to me?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. I can. I'll send it out to the group.
Yes. Good. Thanks.
And it is included with last month's agenda.
Oh.
Also that chart. Yeah.
Okay. I'll look.
Yeah. So yeah, that's exactly. And yeah, remember. So I see Sean, Mary Beth, and Jen. Are your hands just staying up, or is your hand up again, Sean? Okay, cool.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. I just remember at the beginning of ACME, it was kind of a joke because there were so many people. I think the group was like 150 people or something. There's this, this slow development of it growing and growing and growing. And then by the time there was a kickoff meeting, I think fewer than 10 people participated. Then it grew again, right? So it's having people in the room is not the problem because, as you point out, the math folks were there till the very end. And I didn't know exactly how to respond to many of the misconceptions because, even the claim, I'm still confused about the claim that this isn't dictating curriculum for the universities, or at least prerequisites, because as you point out, Fred, while the policy does not address it, that is stipulated in a definition at the beginning of the policy. It doesn't address it. It just dictates it, which is interesting, right? Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, and along the same lines, I think one of the key euphemisms that President Gates used, well, a couple of terms. The policy establishes parameters and conditions for I can't even pronounce it, operationalization. It's not even a word. But the key is parameters and conditions. If the system office is establishing parameters and conditions, that already automatically constrains what faculty can do. And it's pretty clear too, we don't even know really what those parameters and conditions are. They seem to change all the time. They're not really clear about that maybe themselves. But just that alone indicates if they're not writing the curriculum, they are constraining the writing in the curriculum as never before.
Yeah.
Such a good point. Thank you for saying that.
Mm-hmm. I think now that we're talking about this, I think we needed a minute's process maybe after having the conversation. there is so much we could talk about when it comes to, I mean, this conversation could go on forever, I think. And I was hesitant to ask before, just because I don't know how plainly would speak, but I guess there is a question of whether we believe that continuing this conversation is going to be productive. And I'm just wondering if you have any initial thoughts. I think we're probably all going to have to let it sit with us for a little bit longer, because Greg has just forwarded me the research that Dr. Gates mentioned. So, you know, I will share that with you all. But is this a conversation that we think we can adequately have in this forum? Go ahead, Fran. Oh, I thought were you going to say something, Fran?
I just took my hand down. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha. Any initial? Go ahead, Jen.
I would love to put our thoughts together about the racism piece and about what we were just covering, because it seems like at meetings ideas keep coming up and people make great points, but you know, when we have an invited guest, it's really hard to say the thing that you want to say when you have a short period of time to say it and you're not sure that the audience is ready to receive it. And maybe if we wrote down some of, like, had a document that wrote down some of the concerns, it might help. But if the audience isn't willing to receive the message, I don't know. I take your point. I'm just not sure. I feel like I mean, I'm having some personal stuff going on, so I wasn't very articulate today, but I've left meetings from the FAC where I felt like we were so right on about the way that we put together our ideas. And I don't know that they can always be conveyed when we have a guest, especially a guest who the first thing she says is, I have to leave early. You know? So it's it's difficult. And if you have another guest who is just there to listen and not really talk, then it's not really much of a conversation. So I don't know. And maybe we could make the point that, you know, we would like to have a thoughtful, in-depth conversation, but we're just not sure if it can be productive, really. I think that's kind of where we are. And I think that many of us have left many of these meetings feeling that way. So I definitely think it's something to think about. It's tricky.
Yeah. And I would say, Jen, I thought what you had to say was great. I mean, from the perspective of someone who does not know this the way you know it, every time you talk, I'm impressed with, you know, what you have to say and your care. So I love hearing from you. And so maybe we should, I'm wondering whether we should consider that if we address this again, it should be its own special meeting, just because to address it adequately, it needs to be longer. And whether that is even warranted at all, you know, whether the effort is going to bear any fruit at all. You know, what is the purpose of these interactions? Because what I'm hearing in feedback is that we don't believe that this will actually have much of an effect on the product, right? And there are any number of things. I think this has happened over and over with us. You know, that we are scrambling with so many things at once. We should think about that. I think Sean and Myrna.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, you know, Jennifer provided some excellent examples, right? Some real life excellent examples. And Dr. Gates's response was, oh, I have all this data, right? And then she would use a specific example too, the one from Texas. But still, I don't think the discussion ends on a positive note when Dr. Gates's response is basically to say, well, I'm going to send you a bunch of data, and then you can decide what to make of it. But this is the data that we're running on. And yet she was faced with actual examples from our students. So I don't know how productive it would be.
Yeah, I felt like when there was the comment that there are all of these systems who have chosen to adopt this approach. And I just felt like saying, but we are not one of them. In terms of the faculty, right? In terms of the,
Exactly.
right, our development, authentic development with people like Jen who know what we're doing in these classrooms. And I don't think that that's the level at which this decision will ever be made. Myrna and Ron.
Thank you, Kalina. I too want to just say that, Jen, when you did the presentation, it made me have a better understanding as well, relative to the continuation of the conversation we had. So you were definitely very articulate. And so I gathered a couple of things. One where we may not think the conversation is will be productive, I do feel that some of these ideas need to be documented, because if you recall, Jane did reference Netchi several times. And so if we ever get another opportunity to write to Netchi, if that's the pleasure of the body today, then we can say these were the types of examples that were used that are concerning of of this body, and we represent a large body, but at least it's documented that it's been discussed. The other comment I wanted to make, and where I don't think it will be productive like everyone else, I do think it's important for us to document and have some kind of document that says these are the kinds of examples that we're talking about. And then the other point I wanted to make is, and I said this last time, is I like comparing apples and apples, not oranges and apples, where, Texas had their research. It was on Texans, not necessarily Connecticut folks and what we're experiencing. Not all systems are alike. Not all populations are alike in economic, social economic, or any types of the population. I just hate to compare apples and oranges. And the data that she was referencing was not necessarily referencing the population we all are working with. So I think, from just my comments, I think that it is important to document it. I agree with Jen. And Jen, please know that every time you speak, it's very meaningful.
Thank you.
Ron.
Okay. Just whenever Jane talks about data or research, all I can think about is how they have used research in the past, and they have misused it, misapplied it, misappropriated it. Deb Wise pointed out how they misapplied their research on Acme. Okay. I wrote an editorial, I can't remember when it was, about the student success course, okay, pointing out that they had misused the data there. And then I think Lois followed up by contacting those researchers, and the researchers asked for a retraction, because again, they not only misapplied, they didn't just misapply, but they completely put down researchers and said that the researchers had said what the researchers didn't say. It was never anywhere near in there. So I mean, when we get research data, we get studies from them, I mean, you can't even trust it, because it doesn't seem like they have anyone in that office, right, who knows how to apply research to argument. It's frustrating. And so that's why when she said she was going to provide the research, I mean, I had to control the eye roll, because I was like, every time you guys have provided research and data, it's always corrupt. Even the data they provided for KPI and things like that, they're using standards that are not the typical standards that we use. They're using standards that make us look worse than we actually are. They don't include, for example, right, in success rates for courses, they purposely left out withdrawals, okay, because, or I should say left in withdrawals. They left in withdrawals because if they leave in withdrawals, it makes us look worse, right? If they take out with the withdrawals, and we don't know why students withdraw, it's probably not, it's usually not academic driven from my experience. Okay, and so if you take out the withdrawals, our success rates in courses aren't as bad. But if you leave in the withdrawals, it's bad. So what did they do? They left in the withdrawals, right? So that they can make the data speak with you know. And so it's just they manipulate in ways that are just, you know, not ethical. So and I don't, and you know, maybe it's unintentional, but if it's unintentional, it's that may, in some ways that's even worse.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, further to Ronald's point, I think one of the things that I noticed when I participated in committees at the system office level, at the old Board of Trustees for the 4 CSUs, so we're going back to the 2000s, 2005 to 2009, and that was on course management software and online courses. What I noticed was, and I don't think this is surprising, folks who spend all their time at the system office are disconnected from what's going on in the classroom and what are the actual realities that we're dealing with. All they have are spreadsheets. I mean, we see this at the level of local administration too. By the time you get to the provost has no qualitative understanding of what you're doing. It's all a bunch of spreadsheets. It's, you know, number of student credit hours per faculty, load credit, and so forth. But it's much worse at the system office level, because at the institutional level, you can interact with these people and you have governance structures which can counteract some of the bad decisions they make based on faulty data or partial data or biased data or irrelevant data. But at the system office level, it's endemic. And it's, you know, I don't think it's because the people are evil or bad, but it's just, that's all they have. You know, the famous expression, to a hammer, everything is a nail, right? At the system office, everything is a statistic, and it's the ones that they get, and it's off they go. And so that's why I think it's really important that we carve out what belongs to each level within within a complex organization. And curriculum belongs at the local level. It belongs with the faculty. And to the extent, whether we call it, as been pointed out, parameters and conditions and so forth, right? All this has to be, you know, properly allocated to the faculty themselves, right? And not at the central level to anything. They have other functions, and there are legitimate finance functions that go on. I don't think any of us can produce the 100 pages of spreadsheets that, you know, Ben Barnes shows up with at a board meeting. That's a task and a prerogative at the system office level, and they have certain prerogatives with respect to distribution of the budget, right? Of which we have at most an advisory function. So I think, you know, that's largely theirs, but curriculum is largely, and for that matter, almost exclusively, except perhaps for the right of veto, which is typical at any institution. Curriculum committee passes something, the Senate approves it. Well, the president can veto it, but they can't determine even the parameters and the conditions.
I mean, it seems like what we have is we have a structural problem where we do not, in fact, at the moment, have control over the curriculum as faculty. And these personal conversations are helpful as a patch on that problem, but they're not necessarily going to be particularly effective. But I think Myrna brings up a really excellent point that, you know, if we are bearing witness to what we see as a great disaster, it needs to be documented. Did you all see the email that went out right before noon today? And it's this brochure, 22-page brochure style report on Students First. And when I looked at it, I was like, this looks just like the kinds of things we read about places like Tennessee or wherever that allowed us to go down this road, you know. So we are now, you know, and I'm not sure, I did not have a chance to read it. I'm looking at page 16 right now. It keeps referring to the interviewees. So many of the interviewees highlighted the significant number of people involved in the various committees working on Students First. Consensus was that the system office has tried to be inclusive throughout this process, etc. And it acknowledges the issues, but I think there's more to be said, right? So
Can I ask, what time did that come in?
maybe it just went to community college faculty. I will forward it to you all.
Please, I don't have it.
Yeah, let me see. Let me just show you what it looks like at the moment.
Well, I mean, interesting that these anonymous interviewees. I mean, it's like, you know, who are these people?
Right.
And how did you reach out? How did you contact them?
Did anybody know that this was happening?
No.
So this,
But you know, I'm not surprised. Not surprised that it's a consultant that did it.
right.
More money. Going out of state.
Mentions reluctant warriors who have been drowning out other points of view, but have not provided alternatives. All right, so I'll make sure to send that to you all after the meeting.
Jerry, God damn it.
I can hear you talking to your cat, Lois.
Sorry. Sorry.
Okay.
Just showing my frustration about everything.
Don't take it out on the cat, please.
All right, let's move on. So number 5, Students First financial update. And so, you know, David is our finance and infrastructure guy, and Stephen Adair is with us. I was wondering what we would do without him at the FAC, and it turns out we haven't had to figure that out yet, thank goodness. So he's here, and he has sort of been the person who's been digging through the weeds on these numbers and what they actually imply for quite some time. So would you mind kind of talking about this, Stephen?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Kalina. Wonderful to see you all and be in the room here virtually with you. It's been a long time. I have managed without you, so and I'm clearly you've been managing without me just fine. But partly, you know, what David said I think was interesting about Ben Barnes' comment at the Finance Committee about the needing to rethink. I don't know if they're going to do that, but needing to rethink how they are assessing the costs of their transition. But certainly going back to the days when I was on the FAC, the inability to be able to get a handle on the costs were sort of incredibly frustrating, right? Certainly noticed as the continuing documents came out of the finance committees for the last couple of years that the projected costs of doing nothing or without Students First kept growing larger as the overall cost of the system continued to increase, right? So while with Students First kept getting more and more expensive, without Students First kept getting more and more expensive more than that. So you probably, all of you saw the op-ed that I wrote that was endorsed by a whole chunk of you. About, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago on the $100 million shell game. And, you know, everybody sees things out of their own egos, but it did seem to me that much of Barnes' commentary that he sent out was a response to that. And in particular, one of the things that I tried to do in that op-ed was to situate what were the realities for expenditures in relationship to what the projections had been, and just show the distinctions. The very first one, which was, it is true, when they envisioned that the new college would be completed by 2019, right? You should reflect on that for a moment, right? When they first proposed that they thought they could do this in about 1.5 years. But that projection, which was in December of 2017, they missed where we are now in 2021 by just about $100 million. In fact, the current budget for the community colleges is $50 million more this year, or at least it was in June when they did the budget, than what they had forecasted for doing nothing. And so that disparity sort of speaks to, you know, that and I won't go on for very long, but and maybe many of you have already heard me say this, but you know, in 2017, the cost of the system office was about $30 million. And that's gone up roughly about $8 million every year, and then took the big jump this year with the shared services line that brings it up to 69 million, more than double. That $39 million increase in the system office is more than the total cost of 7 community colleges. Not 7 together, but 7 of you, right? Just the increase in the costs. Students First is costing a lot, but it's really difficult to get a handle on exactly what those numbers are. In any case, Barnes's response, right? So I think Cleaner included that. What I tried to do is create a response to the response. The projections that they made in 2018 were pretty remarkable. That is, that they did prove to be pretty accurate for what both revenues and expenditures were going to be. But at the same time, what they missed was that the amount of revenue coming in from tuition and fees went down more than $30 million. And the state legislature added that additional fringe benefit, which was also well over now $30 million for this year. So while they were within about $8 million of revenue or something like that, $8 or $9 million, there's 2 different things going on at the same time: missing tuition by 30 million and missing increased support from the state legislature by 30 million. Those 2 things cancel each out, and looks like their guess was great. That's just, I mean, that is just a coincidence. Not only that, but the budget that they made in June this year for fiscal year 21 was $544 million for the total cost of the community colleges. They made that adjustment then in October, and so the projection in 2018 corresponds well with not the $544 million that they did in June, but with the restructuring that they did because of the COVID response, right? And the Barnes letter presents it as though we're professionals, we're doing this well, our plan is unfolding as we predicted, all is well, you can trust us to provide you with degrees of accuracy, and yet it was just coincidental luck that their projections turned out to be relatively accurate. So that's the first part of what I have written up. The second part is really to try to, you know, this is much more fragmentary and much more difficult, which is to try to identify really what's the elements of the costs of the consolidation. What you find in the last part, I think, is much more fragmentary. It's harder for me to have more confidence in that. But at the same time, it does seem to me wanting to rethink how it is that they do that. So I'm I don't know, submitting this to you, thinking that maybe the FAC wants to endorse this document in order to make it a little more official and provide then input to the system office and to the board from that.
I'll move that the FAC endorse the document.
Second?
I'll second.
Second.
Great. And thank you so much for that, Stephen, because it is mind-boggling, right? The the 20 here and 30 here, 30, it's hard to keep track. So any further discussion before we vote on endorsing it, and then we'll pass it along? All right, all in favor? Try a voice vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Abstentions? All right. So we will pass that along. And again, we've asked for a clearer measure so that we don't have to do this kind of after the fact figuring it out, digging through it. But thank you, Stephen.
Yeah. As Stephen, I'm sure knows, spreadsheets, even when they're accurate, it depends how you categorize it and what level of spreadsheet you show to people. So, you know, I had a search for shared services in the over 80 pages of spreadsheets that were presented at the last Finance Committee meeting. And even then, my eyesight is not good enough to detect it in the tiny little print that it was there. So I fortunately was able to do a find. But when the other category that I mentioned earlier, and many other similar things are real problems. And it's easy then to pull the wool over other people's eyes in a certain sense. Or let me put it this way, it's biased, and we all have our biases, right? Obviously, our bias is in opposition to Students First, and his is in favor of it. And consequently, there's going to be a different kind of selection of numbers that are significant. And I think the work that Steve has done is really exemplary.
Agreed. And truly, that memo was a bit of self-defense without any eye to its actual effects on the system and on students and on how we function. So it's nice to have an accounting of what actually happened that does take those into account. All right.
So thank you.
Thank you again. Next is the update on the FAC resolution on relations with the BOR, and we'll talk about next steps. So as we mentioned, we had that meeting on February 5th. And David, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we had specifically asked for the two items that were in our resolution from earlier in 2020, namely a joint meeting biannually with the board, between the FAC and the board, as stated in the statutes 185. And secondly, our determination that we are a committee for the board. We're actually mentioned specifically in the statutes. Committees of the board regularly report at every meeting. If they have nothing to report, it says nothing to report this meeting, but it's still an agenda item. And we want the same consideration for the FAC, namely that we have an agenda item at each meeting of the board. So as Colina mentioned, what was sort of the outcome was, well, we should be working more closely with the chairs of the committees and with the committees themselves, and bringing matters up at the committees before they come up at the board, because as Colina mentioned, on their view, the board is largely a rubber stamp, right? It approves things that are coming through on the consent agenda, or which are being brought forward more substantively by the committees. What I said was, at that point, they were not ready. Right? And one of the things that was brought up was, well, we tried to have joint meetings before and it didn't work, and so we're not ready to do it again. I have no information on any previous attempts. Maybe Steve Adair is aware of that might go back to 2011. And on the question of the regular agenda item, as I said, it was a question of, well, let's coordinate better with the chairs and with the various committees. So I said at the end of that meeting, basically, well, I think we have an agreement on principle that we are in favor of the promotion of public higher education in the state of Connecticut. And I think that's an accurate statement. We do have disagreements, and a significant one on policy, and that's with respect to Students First. And on procedures, we've brought up what we would like to see. We are not yet on agreement on that, and we're going to have to come back to it again. And so the suggestion was we have another meeting after this meeting, the next meeting of the board. And so I suspect that we're going to have that meeting. We'll certainly ask for it again. So that's where we're at. I would add that there are other issues that I think should be brought up. For example, respect for the distinct missions of the community colleges and the universities. That's in the statutes, and there's supposed to be an annual report to that matter. I don't think that's being done. The statutes talk about that the board can merge or consolidate institutions within one of the sectors with a 2/3 vote of the board, and by informing the committees which are relevant. However, and this is a question of interpretation, I don't think it says that it can consolidate all of the institutions within a sector and thereby eliminate that sector, because the statute 185 talks in at least twice to the, mentions twice, the community technical college system. If they are planning to eliminate that in favor of CSCC, they're going to have to go before the legislature for an amendment. It may be considered only a technical amendment, but it seems to me that that is a matter that which we should be pointing out. And I think it's more than a technical amendment, because I would say, at least on my interpretation, now I'm just a philosopher, I'm not a lawyer, and so I will defer to Paul on this one perhaps, that when it says you can merge institutions within a sector, that doesn't that doesn't necessarily imply all. At least from a logical point of view, it doesn't. So I think there are a number of matters that we can continue to bring up, and which we will continue to bring up. I thought there was small progress, and we saw a little bit of that at the last meeting in terms of the amendment to the minutes. I say, although that's an extremely minor point. Nonetheless, I think we have some progress, and of course, a lot of this is based on interpersonal relations.
Stephen, you look like you're about to say something. Are you?
Me? No, Paul.
Oh, no, Stephen. I saw his thing light up for a sec.
No, I see Paul is.
Go ahead, Paul.
Hi, yeah, David, you make an excellent point, and I don't mean from a legal perspective. I mean, you just make an excellent point. And it reminds me of something I forgot, I'm sorry, who said it a few minutes ago, but relative to the fact that we don't know when we're going to be or have the opportunity to speak to Netchi again. And since we are a statutory committee, as David has well said, and since we do believe that they are in violation of state statute, and we know that the BOR, probably every chance that they get, is going to send documents to Netchi. Could we, or Dr. Susineker or others, send the minutes of the FAC to Netchi? Again, we're just as much statutory as the BOR is, and so I'm confident that Netchi would be willing to at least accept those, hopefully review them, because they're getting one-sided arguments all the time. We already know that they pretty much dismissed everything that we submitted last year and only held to what the BOR submitted. But if Kalina could submit these minutes and or the recordings to Netchi, at least they would get, first of all, documentation, but secondly, a different perspective of, like you just said, David, we believe that they're in violation of state statute. We want to work with them. They're not working with us. And all of these comments that have been put forward just today, let alone every FAC meeting. So I was wondering if perhaps we could either just forward the minutes or ask Netchi, given our rank within the hierarchy, and again, that we are statutory, more so than other groups that they might not be willing to listen to, if we could forward at least the minutes to them and see if they would accept them. Thank you.
I mean, that's an interesting suggestion. I don't know if they're going to read through all of our minutes. I know that their attention span may be fairly limited, even though they can write fairly long reports. But maybe what we should do is synthesize those minutes on the specific issues where we consider they are out of compliance. Let me put it that way. Right? I wouldn't go so far as to use the term violate at this point, because I'm not sure if it's willful and wanton. But at the same time, they are certainly out of compliance. And I think it's worth pointing out to Netchi. And if I could contact you, Paul, on this some versus all aspect, there are issues related to 185 that I'd like a lawyer's point of view on. And then maybe we could produce something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly don't want to put more work on Lois, but perhaps I agree with you, David. They're not going to read through everything, but if with the Word document of the 2, 3, 4, 5-page minutes, if perhaps just some of those areas could be highlighted just with information that we think would be more relevant, and at least they could see the 3 or 4 areas on 1 or 2 pages that are highlighted that we at least want them to concentrate on. And all I would say is reference to that. I mean, a violation of a statute doesn't have to be willful. So, but yeah, I'd be happy to. And those are good points, David. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we could extract from the minutes, and rather than having Lois reproduce them all, we could extract from the minutes as to indicate that we have discussed these matters. Yeah. So let's you and I work on it, Paul.
Great. I think you mentioned, David, though, this is all happening on a sort of a personal level. Stephen put in the chat that in 2012, the FAC was told that we could bring an item that could be added to the agenda of the BOR. The answer was, could we bring it? Yes. But they did mention that some items should go to subcommittees first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My hypothesis is that the biannual meeting between the BOR and the FAC somehow morphed sometime between 2012 and 2020 now, or 2021, into a biannual report.
Right.
And
a very
happened, just slippage.
Yeah. So I know that we've been concerned about that, and actually the Higher Ed Committee has been concerned about that relationship also, and about satisfying that statute. And that has turned into a concern about like the composition of the BOR, the qualifications of the BOR, of board members, and so on. So those sorts of conversations have been happening with members of the Higher Ed Committee, and the result is a bill proposing to study this structure of the system, and perhaps propose a different structure for the system. Perhaps propose a different composition of the Board of Regents, qualifications or training that the Board of Regents might be required to take, etc. Right? So as it exists right now, there is just a placeholder for it, in hopes that, provided testimony and consideration, they'd have some proposal to make. And I'm going to share a potential proposal in hopes that we might want to endorse it in some way so that we can encourage other members of faculty to testify in this direction if they see fit. So they'll at least know what we have thought about and may think is appropriate, right? And there might be modification down the line, but at the moment, why can I never find Word? There it is. This is what it looks like, and you all have it from before. I emailed it to you, but I'll just read it. There shall be a study of the efficacy of the Board of Regents and the CSU system of governance from its inception in 2011 to the present. The study shall include consideration of measures of student success, the relative cost of administration, and the effectiveness of communication, governance, and the setting of budgetary priorities between the Board of Regents and the 17 educational institutions. The study may also include a review of the efficacy of alternative governance structures for public higher education in other states. The study will be conducted by a committee that shall consist of, don't know how many, members of the Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee, 2 officials from the Office of Higher Education, 2 current members of the Board of Regents or their designees, 1 university president, 1 CEO or president of the community colleges, the chair and vice chair of the FAC, and 4 faculty or staff, 2 selected by CSU AAUP, 1 selected by the 4 Cs, 1 selected by AFT. In their report, the committee may include recommendations for reforms in the governance and or budgeting structure of the Board of Regents and CSU system, or propose alternative structures of governance, right? So we know that there's an issue, but it does seem that we're going to need to think through it with a group. And again, thank you, Stephen, for helping put this together. So any thoughts? I guess I want to see you all again if possible. So I will stop sharing.
Actually,
Like the
could you share it
direction,
again?
yeah.
Could you share it again?
Sure, sure.
Anyways, I think this is a really good idea. I would just add where it says from its inception 2011 to the present, I would add comma, especially since the inception of Students First in 2017. Because if we go back to all the crap that happened in 2012, 2013, 2014, from presidents and so forth, whose names we can barely remember, I think it's going to be, too broad. But nonetheless, it is relevant to look at what was expected in 2011. And in 2011, what was expected was something completely different from what we have. UConn was supposed to be part of this. It was supposed to be a board of higher education for the state of Connecticut. It has become a board of higher education for 1/2, or for part 2 or part B of Section 185. That is us minus UConn. And that made it very different. It would have been a very different sort of board had it simply been coordinating and supervising all of public higher education in the state. It would not be doing activist things like Students First with respect to UConn. You better believe it. But once UConn dropped out, as it were, right, on the basis that they're a research university and they win a lot of basketball games, then that left a board which all of a sudden was looking for something to do. And it was transformed 2020, so I think it is relevant to mention that. But then with a president who had backing of a good part of the legislature, it became Students First with the momentum that we've seen. So I really think that this is an excellent idea.
I also think it's important. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, finish.
Can I move its approval? We need a resolution.
Absolutely.
I'll second that.
Great.
What's the resolution?
Do you want to, David?
It's a resolution that was just displayed. I think you probably better keep it up.
I'll put it back up. So the resolution that we shared on the proposed substitute language for the currently just sort of placeholder study bill HB 6402.
Resolution on supporting the proposed substitute language?
Yes.
Okay.
Is this being supported by anyone in the legislature right now?
Well, it was written by somebody in the legislature.
Who was it written by?
Not. Go ahead, Stephen.
So it was written by me. Sorry, with Kalina's help, but and it's been shared with Josh Elliott. And it was shared, by the way, at AUP last night. So
I think fell asleep. Sorry.
Yeah, and just to clarify what Kalina said, so this language will need to go into the public hearing process. So the language right now just says there'll be a study of higher ed. So this has to be proposed during public hearings, and if anybody wants to present on this, need to say, I'd like to offer the following substitute language for the bill.
Right.
Has it been shared with any other people in the legislature?
At the moment, just Josh, who is a co-chair, but it was very much the existence of this is sort of in response to the fact that there was a real difficulty filling out what that study bill should be, right? Because it's just such, there's so much going on. And Stephen is the first chair of the FAC. So it seemed to be sort of that I had some, like a wish list kind of thing that I had shared, and we were kind of going back and forth. And it originally started as proposals for training of board members or a different composition of the board, but all in the pursuit of addressing the structural issues. And I think part of the what we realize is that that's not something that can be proposed at this moment, hence the study bill. I mean, Josh seems to think this shouldn't be particularly difficult because it's about just getting clear on the issues.
And Josh is the chair of the higher ed committee,
Co-chair.
co-chair. Now,
Yeah.
we have friends on that committee who
Yeah.
supported us. There are about 9 of them on that committee that supported us last year when we had the similar discussions. And could it be shared with them also?
Yeah, I mean,
I mean-
if we approve it, then that's exactly what we
Okay.
do. We kind of got a
Yeah.
sense of whether it was even viable from Josh, and the answer seemed to be yes. So if we approve it, we will certainly share it with them, and then hopefully we're going to be sharing it with faculty at all the colleges and universities and asking them to do exactly what Stephen described. You have to actually request that this be the substitute language that will go into the bill. And I
Thank you.
don't yet know when the hearings will be, but probably sometime in the first week of March.
Well,
Stephen.
Can I say one more thing about this? So we again presented this at AUP last night, and they accepted this language and endorsed it. Joe Graybars, right, our lobbyist, was there, so he has suggestions for this bill, right? And we haven't been able to communicate yet today, but I think we'll be talking later this afternoon. So in that conversation, he may be suggesting some alternative phrasings or so on, but it would be consistent with the intent of what's there, I think.
Okay. So we will go.
This is Barbara.
Go ahead.
Can I say something about this one? I've thought about the board and what's wrong with it, and I think that one of the things that's wrong with it is I doubt that very many of those board members have children who went to any of our institutions. I think they're probably all pretty well off financially, and that it would be interesting to see I don't know if we can tell what towns they come from, but I suspect they come from wealthy towns. They don't know people like our students. It's a very strange situation to have wealthy people deciding about our public education institutions. And I don't know how you fix that, but I think it would be useful to have it as part of the conversation if we could. I think they have to file financial forms, and it would be interesting to see, just how rich are they?
Yeah.
So Steve, are you going to meet with the AUP lobbyist? You're muted.
So he talked to Patty about it today. So Patty emailed me while I've been talking with you, saying, please talk to Joe because he has some suggestions about that.
Okay, I think we can say, we can authorize you as well in this motion. So we're going to endorse the document that Kalina presented, and we're going to authorize Steve Adair to meet with other relevant persons to make such modifications as may be suggested.
Seconded.
Sounds good. Great.
Who made the motion? Sorry. I mean, who?
Seconded.
David? David,
Yeah,
was that
I made
you?
the motion and authorize Steve to meet with the AUP to make such revisions as may be required.
Got it, Lois?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
So Steve will have to file a document as an agent of the FAC.
All right. In favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Right. We have adopted it. Thanks again, Stephen.
Hmm.
And what is next? FAC elections. Barbara.
Can you hear me?
Huh?
Okay. You have to sort of double unmute here. I'm not on this agenda, or you're not calling on me because I'm running these elections. I am absolutely not. I did it.
Don't you worry.
I just want to say that I'm happy to give people all my paperwork and whatever they would like in the way of written help. And but it needs to happen at some point, and we need to decide when we're going to get going. And it could be structured so that a committee does it. It could be 2 people, 1 university, 1 community college. However people want to do it. We just need to think about the timing.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice if we can get them done by spring and have people visiting meetings in the fall. I think some of you did that and found it useful.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we have such a good group now is because we did the elections correctly, which has not quite always been the case. And also, the best way to do it is to be thinking, if anyone who's on now is not thinking about running again, think very hard about who might be good and be encouraged to run, because it doesn't pop into people's heads very often like, oh, I think I'll run for the FAC. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I, in fact, called quite a few people and said, have you thought about running?
Right.
And that's okay. They didn't have any, it was nothing unfair about the election, and other people did run. And a lot of campuses, I didn't know anybody, but it's kind of a group job to make sure that we have another good group next time.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure, but try.
Has anyone been contemplating, being part of this committee or co-chairing with someone? Should have done my work this month.
Are we talking about elections at the campus levels?
At the community colleges, it's a little more complicated than simply telling the universities to elect someone, because we have to have like statewide stuff also.
Okay, because at the universities, it's done by the university senate. I mean, I'll bring it up to Fred, and I can't recall when the last election was. I do remember that Steve Adair came to see me and said, "You're probably going to get stuck with this." Steve, I can't remember the exact terminology. I think it was I had moved at least a half a dozen motions of non-confidence in everything and everything. The system office, BOR, you name it, I'd done it, and so that it sort of fell to me, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll be continuing.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so at the universities, even if we don't get this together right now, I think Barbara, this is a good time to start talking to to your Senate leaders to make sure that someone is in the running.
Yeah,
I know that
it would be good if somebody is contacting the university people and saying, it's coming up, so hope you have it in mind. And I know at Southern they actually they elect for a bunch of things at once, and this is kind of on the list. So the Senate people need to know that it's one of the things that needs to be on the list this time. Things like that. Each place is different with the universities.
Right.
Well, I could get the list of the university Senate presidents from Fred and contact them. So I could do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm happy to at least send a message out to remind people, but Fred, you were going to go ahead.
Yeah, this sort of morphs into a topic I'd probably like to put on the March agenda. That's the integrity of the community college senates or governance structures. We've got some serious problems regarding that, certainly at Tunxus, and I don't think we're alone. So I want to make sure when this election happens that the faculty control the election.
Okay.
I think we might need to talk about that.
Well, our bylaws do clearly state who can vote, and only full-time teaching faculty can vote on the faculty side. The staff side they're supposed to be student serving, direct service to students, the staff people. So again, it should not be administrators that are casting any votes, but I know you have deeper problems than just the question of casting the votes.
Right, it's process.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm looking for the statutes, and I'm just having a little trouble finding them on my computer. I remember they were printed out at that last meeting that we had before COVID. Could you send me a copy? If you have
Sure.
it,
I
Connie?
actually have to get them on the website. That was on my to-do list for this week,
Okay.
which is
That would be helpful. And
not
you know,
quite.
it's for later discussion, but I've never quite figured out why only 3 or 4 universities vote and why only 7 or something like that of the 12 community colleges vote. And I can't recall if that's in the statute in 185.
Statute.
Right, so that's something also which we should review.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't make any sense.
And Barbara did great work to kind of get around it, but for participation.
It doesn't make any
A
sense.
lot of what we need to look at is the bylaws. The statutes have a very bare minimum of requirements, and then the bylaws have elaborate ways of how it should be done.
Mm-hmm. And David, you're just saying that perhaps we can get to the statute so that we don't have to get so elaborate, right?
Well, if it's in our bylaws, I'd like to just see every representative from every community college and university vote. I mean, there's 12, and then there's 12 community colleges, there's 4 universities, and there's Charter Oak. That's 17.
Mm-hmm. All right, so
the statute does not allow that, but we can certainly look at that again, and we could always change the bylaws again if we wanted to.
Yeah.
I'm going to hope to persuade you, somebody, between now and the next meeting. But I think I'll commit to at least sending an email to community college. David, you'll handle the universities.
Yeah, I can look after the universities.
And I'll send to the community college governance leaders, just reminding them that this is coming up, so it's not off the radar, and folks can start thinking about it, and then we'll go from there. Shouldn't be too awful as long as we have extra hands. Go ahead, Linda. Yeah.
I just want to point out, I understand the concerns around, fairness of not all the colleges being represented with a vote. My understanding from the history of it and talking to people is that the reason it played out that way in the legislation is because it gives 4 votes to the CSUs and 4 votes to the community colleges, 2 to us. But that way, you risk the possibility of all 12 community colleges always being able to outvote all 4 CSUs. That's the way it's been explained to me in terms of the history of it. It's a moot point for our institution because we'll always be a minority, and we probably should be because we're so tiny compared to the rest. But I just wanted to bring that up.
Interesting.
That makes sense. All right. I think we have made it through. Linda, did you raise a hand again, or it looked like it just popped up again? Okay. All right. So, and Myrna. Go ahead, Myrna.
Sorry, I just wanted, before we end our meeting, I wanted to just say I shared information because I saw Lois had posted something on salaries. And I'm just sharing with everyone, and I did share it on the email. If you haven't gotten a copy of that, some of you may already have made knowledge of it. It's around the 2020 CSCU 2021 proposed salary structure and positions. And it's in your emails. You could review that for anyone that's working on the finance piece.
Thank you. Yes, I see it.
Oh, the hiring roster. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
So yeah, that's what I said when I received it. You want to talk about the inflation?
Yeah. And at the end of Stephen's response, or the response to Barnes, there's a measure of how much these salaries have increased, because there's a constant mention of the fact that it's all internal hires, which affects us in a couple of different ways. One is that we're shifting resources away from students, but the other is that it actually does cost. It doesn't not cost. And Rebecca is here. I almost forgot. So very quickly before we go, Mike asked Rebecca to come and talk about, just very quickly, explain the form issue with the new programs. So if you want to do that, Rebecca.
Sure, thank you. Sorry about that. I was like in a process here.
Sorry, it just jumped in my head.
So there's so many forms going around. So I'm also on APRC. I might slip and call it AARP by accident. Please don't yell at me. There's so many acronyms out there. But so the form that Mike had sent me, that very detailed Board of Regents one, that's the one for brand new programs that have never existed in the community college system that we have now. So the reason I know this all is because when Mike and I were aligning our curriculum, one of the things we used to do is if we had forensic science students for UNH, we would have them sent through general studies, and we would modify the general studies pathway for them to go to UNH. Under the new One College, we've been advised that we're probably not going to be able to do that anymore, and the recommendation was to make a brand new forensic science program. So creating a brand new program that's never existed in the community college system, we then have to use that form. We have to show all the background data, that there's jobs available, who is going to be the instructor, so on and so forth. After we get that approved at this level under this system, then we have to bring it through APRC to put it into the new system. So we have to fill out the set of documents that we've done for the criminal justice program and criminology TAP pathway. So that's a different set of forms. I know Mike was kind of alluding to the fact of, well, isn't the new CJ program a new program? Philosophically, maybe you could say yes, but it's a merger of 11 programs that already exist in the system, and that's why we fill out the APRC form, not the Board of Regents form. Did that make any sense with what I just said?
Yeah, Rebecca, I'm the one that raised this issue, and I think, I mean, it's not as simple as just merging programs, as you guys discovered over the summer. It's a very complicated process, and I do think that when you have a new college, every program in the college is a new program, and so therefore, what you guys are creating is a new program. You know, you can mince words like the BOR. I think they want to mince words because it will speed up the process, but there are all kinds of questions that remain given the documents, the APRC documents. They don't answer enough questions. For instance, do we know that based upon the changes that you guys have made in order to align these programs, that all the colleges have the resources that they need in order to fully commit to what you guys have created, especially since you've created some new courses, right? Do we have those resources? Does the library have those resources? Do we have people who can, if there are clinical or field placement, do we have people who are responsible for doing that at all of the colleges, right? Do we have, other questions are, do we have a employer advisory committee? Like every program has to have an advisory committee. Is there going to be one advisory committee for the entire system, for the entire state, because it's one program? Or are you going to have multiple advisory committees because you have employers at different places in different parts of the state? I mean, there's so many questions that go into creating a program for a college that are not answered by the simplistic documents that are being submitted for endorsement. And that's going to leave faculty with a whole, I mean, our curriculum committee is used to asking these questions. I mean, they're extremely thorough when they look at these programs. And these are the kinds of questions they're going to be asking of these aligned programs. And those forms that are going around for the aligned programs are not thorough enough to provide answers to the faculty on these questions and others. I mean, what's going to be the schedule for program review? Who's going to be carrying out the program review, right? I mean, there's so much information that needs to be established before this new college and these programs can function in these new college. And those forms don't answer those questions at all. So that's sort of a problem.
And, oh, go ahead, Kalina.
So I just want to be really mindful of the time because it's 4 o'clock. And what I'm hearing is that there might be need for actual discussion about this and that we might need to revisit this another time. So but I'm leaving you mid-sentence. So can you just quickly just say what you have to say, Rebecca, and then we can say that we'll come back to it?
These are the same questions we have on ARPC. They're the same questions Mike and we have a running, ongoing questions list. Who's gonna be in charge of scheduling? Who's gonna be in charge of scheduling the online classes? Who's like, is this new dean of criminal justice gonna do this? We have the same list. Believe me, we're very like-minded with this. And those are all the questions. Are we gonna have one advisory board for criminal justice? Each of our areas has different unique needs. So we're on the same page with the same, well, at least Mike and I and our work group with those same questions. And the one thing about ARPC, and I will say, we're finding out what we don't know as we keep going through the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's not enough time to get it all done, Ron, and I understand that too.
Right.
But we were asked to do the curriculum alignment and the outcomes, and that's what we did. And it was good for our program, but you have many more questions that you brought up, points.
I'm hoping that Mike, Rebecca, and Ron, that maybe we could talk over the next month and maybe put something in writing just to describe the difference and the need for this, perhaps.
Well, I'm sure at my institution that our response to the endorsement request will include all of these questions and all of these problems. So that will probably be a reason why we will not endorse. So that's unless these questions are answered ahead of time. So.
Thank you so much for jumping in, Rebecca. But I'm glad to know that we're not missing anything. These are questions that we need to talk about.
These are questions everybody has right now. Like, what differentiates a 100 level from a 200 level?
Okay.
Right, and then there's a question that's come up, which is how do the universities handle the transitions and any modifications they have to make to their the question came up at the was it at the board meeting about different admission standards at the different universities, right? And I don't know, I mean, I suggested to Mike that we meet and discuss this, but Jennifer Headland, who's the chair of criminal justice at CCSU, really wants to have more information. I wonder if we could maybe invite her to our talk as well.
Our talk on Monday? Sure.
Yeah.
And I apologize, I totally misinterpreted your question yesterday. You threw me for a loop. I thought you were asking me something totally different.
Oh, that's all right. That's okay. Many people have that same impression.
But thank you all. Anytime you want me to come back and clarify anything, I mean, about the
I'll
process.
see if Jennifer can join us at on Monday at 10.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to explain. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Happy Friday.
Bye.
Thank you. Old business? New business?
Yeah, on the March agenda, Kalina, I'd like to add relationship between community college management and community college governance bodies.
Okay. And David, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to move to adjourn.
Can I just take one moment because we forgot to give you an update on the conference, and it's coming up very soon.
I remember
very quickly, I should have asked someone to do this, but since it's just so last minute, I'll just quickly say April 16th, please save the date. The save the date was supposed to have gone out this week. It hasn't. We'll see whether it can go out through the system office or not. And if not, it'll have to circulate through unions. As you know, the system office is not supporting us this year financially. So we are being supported by the unions. At the moment, we have as part of a panel, Stephen Breyer, Austerity Blues, Jennifer Middlestat, who is associated with the New Deal for Higher Education, and who am I blanking? Sherry Wolf, who is involved in bargaining for the common good, which our unions are also. So just keep that date, please, and we'll try to get that save the date to actually move sometime within the next day or so. Now, yes, please, motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, wait, Myrna.
Very
Go
quick
ahead.
on your report, our union is looking to issue the check and I don't want them to renege on it, so we need to finalize where they send the check.
The account. Okay, we
Thank
will
you.
do that. Thank you.
Now, David, you can.
No, if anybody else wants to say something, go ahead. I see that Lois's cat is indicating by its posture that it is in agreement and seconding my motion.
We are behind it.
So I wanted
He's in
to,
full agreement.
so Lois, on behalf of her cat, I take it that you're seconding the motion?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Anthony is seconding the motion.
Put it in the minutes. Put it in the minutes and see if anybody catches it.
I will.
All right. Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm stopping recording.
Thank you.